Hello and welcome to this, another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 115 with Catherine Goldschmidt, DP of House of the Dragon. Enjoy.
Are you watching anything cool yourself?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me because I have listened to your podcast before. The problem is I'm deep in production right now, so it's I find it difficult. It's not just the time that I have, which is little, but it's also just the headspace that you get into when you're making your own thing and like not wanting to pollute that somehow. But that said, I did recently watch the Brooke Shields documentary that I think is on Hulu in the States,
Sure.
On Disney Plus here, that my friend Lana Wilson made, and I thought it was excellent, actually. So that's a recent watch of mine that I can remember.
Point to. Yeah, I was talking to I think it was Benji Bakshi, who shot Strange New Worlds, and he had a similar thing where it was like, and a lot of DPs have brought this up, where it's just like if you're working on something, you know, basically why go home and then almost go back to work by watching something?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's a little close to home, although the opposite of home. But yeah, it's a little close. And yeah, and you're also just looking at a screen all day long as well, and then to go home to more screens. So yeah, I usually just look at my dog and then my pillow.
Yeah. I actually, speaking of screens, this has started happening to me. I got scared. I thought I got like macular degeneration. I was staring. I like got a day off. So I was like, you know what? I haven't played a video game in a year and a half. Let me do this. I'm doing that. And then I went to edit. I'm looking at a screen. Then I was looking at my phone. And the next morning, it still hasn't quite gone away. But the next morning, my left eye, I could see the back of my retina, like in my vision. And so it's not rad. But it didn't occur to me until now. Like looking through an eyepiece of like a traditional film camera won't give you that. You know, it's the ground glass and stuff. But I'm wondering, like, shit, are we gonna start going blind because we're just constantly focused, you know, like a foot in front of us?
Yeah. And especially, you know, on the digital, when you're in the black tent and you just have these, like, you know, it's not just the screens, but, you know, you have the waveform and the this and, you know, and everything is just sort of like shining at you constantly. Yeah. Hopefully not. Hopefully we won't. We need our eyes.
So that was the scariest part. I was like, oh shit, am I gonna have to go into music? But I guess that apropos of nothing, you brought up the tent. Are you working with on the show you're working on? Are you doing like the on-set colorist, or is that just like the viewing tent?
Yeah, so I'm doing season 2 right now of House of the Dragon, and the tent is the DIT's tent. So we do have live grade. We you know, I personally use it sparingly. So that's the tent I refer to.
Yeah. So do you kind of go in setting like a base look and then it gets tweaked on set, or do you kind of just let the DIT figure it out and you just kind of okayed something at the begining? I guess that's the same thing. But yeah, kind of what's your approach to?
Yeah, well, we have a show LUT, so it's literally just one LUT across the show. So, you know, so everybody starts with that, and then yeah, when I'm going into a scene, you know, I mean, the first conversation is always like, you know, what should we set the color balance to on the camera? And that is really sort of like the basis for then where I set the lights and how we build the color from there.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But yeah, and to be honest, I usually don't do too much more than color balance and, you know, and you know, we make minor adjustments for certain lenses, you know, and we, you know, we come to know sort of what those are over the course of a show as well. So yeah, and that's try to keep it simple, honestly.
Yeah, I started freelance coloring because I was coloring all my own stuff. But over the pandemic, I was doing a lot, and I found that like I feel like people get a little too in the weeds with, especially if you get the panel, you can really start spinning knobs around it. It's like just a little like white balance and tint and maybe the contrast knob. But it's like, it's all you need. It's like nice. What do they say about nice food? You just need salt and pepper. You don't gotta.
Yeah. Exactly. If the ingredients are good, then, exactly.
Yeah. I did want to ask, because I think you've got to be one of the few American BSC members. How did that come about? You must have been working there forever to get that distinguishment.
Yeah. So I've lived here, as in England. I live in London. I lived in London for 9 years now. And my husband is English. So that is how we came there. Yeah. So he first tried living in LA. So we did that I had lived in LA for almost 10 years. And he tried for 3, the length of like the first green card you get. And when that was up for renewal, the next one you get is permanent. And he was like, so is this it? Are we always living in your country now? Or,
right.
What's the deal? And so I don't know, this job is portable, isn't it? And I just thought, well, if I can do it here, I can do it there. And I'm traveling for work all the time anyway, and let's give it a shot. So that's that story. But yeah, the BSC thing was, a huge honor, and I'm thrilled. I only just joined 2 months ago. So.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, no, it was recent. Yeah.
Because I got that book. Shit, where is it?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not in that book.
Yeah, well, because I saw you had co-founded, was it Illuminatrix, the DP?
Yeah.
Not conglomerate, but I saw Collective. Thank you. And I saw Ula Ponticos is in there. I was like, oh, I interviewed her, and she was great. So I went looking for you in the book. I was like, oh fuck, it's already out of print.
Already out of print. Yeah, they just need to add in some inserts or whatever to keep it current.
Yeah. Like they do with the ASC manual. You open it up and pages fall out, and they're like, oh, sorry, after we printed this, we realized our charts were wrong. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does that come about? Because I know with the ASC, it's this whole 2 people have to vouch for you, and then there's a secret society with a box of black balls and white balls, whatever the hell they do. With the BSC, is it more relaxed? Is it more stringent? How did they reach out to you about it?
Yeah, so I guess it's similar. I mean, I don't know exactly how the ASC works because I'm not in that organization, but the BSC is also, you are nominated by 2 people who have been in the BSC in good standing for, I think, 5 years or more. So you have one person who nominates you and another person who seconds you. And so they write nice things about you, and then I think also say nice things when they all have their meeting. Fabian Wagner was
cool.
who recommended me. It was really cool. Yeah, so he was the lead DP obviously on House of Dragon season 1. He recommended me for membership, and then Angus Hudson was my seconder.
That's awesome.
It was good.
Yeah, Fabian's got an awesome. I don't know him off the top of the head, but I've run into his name a million times. He's got a great CV on him, doesn't he?
Yes. Yeah. Well, obviously, tons of Thrones and The Crown, and then worked with Zack Snyder, and he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess so I was not a Game of Thrones person necessarily. When I was in college, the first couple seasons came out, and I stuck with it then, and then fell off because I'm really bad at watching anything that's longer than a mini series. But were you a Game of Thrones person before getting the House of Dragons gig, or did you kind of have to go back and watch stuff, get boned up on it?
I am with you on it's difficult for me to stay invested in a series over the long haul. And that is, I think, partially I'm just going to blame my childhood, because so I grew up without a television. So we weren't allowed to watch anything.
Oh, wow.
We were taken to the movies, and we also had a VHS player connected to a box that was not connected to anything else. So we could rent movies, but it was very strict and structured and at certain times of day and blah, blah, blah. So I just don't have that like come home from work and turn on the television and also I don't have the serialized like binge. So all of that's difficult for me. Anyway, all that being said, I remember when the first season came out because I had just read the first book. So then I watched the first season and I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is exactly how I'm going to digest this from here on out. And so then I got the second book and somewhere along the line, I put that down and I did not finish the second book. And therefore I did not immediately finish the second series either. And, but anyway, but then I went back to it and I went back to it by the time the show was ending, because by that point I had moved to England, but I was back in LA doing a show called Dummy. And my whole crew every Monday morning was just like gushing. So it became this whole thing where like everybody had to watch it on Sunday so they could come in on Monday and talk about it. So that's when I caught up. And yeah, so anyway, so it's, you know, there are fans and then there's me who like, you know, really loved the show and was really psyched to get, it was Fabian who called me about it actually originally. So, and, you know, and I was a huge fan of his work. And so anyway, so that was a no-brainer for me, but that is the whole story about my relationship.
Sure. Do you find that, because I interviewed a handful of people who shot Star Trek, and you know that's certainly one of those shows that like have, as I've mentioned, Mark Hamill calls them ultra passionate fans. You know, yes. The UPFs. Do you find that coming in with kind of a fresh eye has maybe not fresh, but a slightly removed from that deep fan? Do you find that is helpful to you, or potentially did you need to get like reminded of stuff by maybe people on the group who were like, no.
Yeah, so I mean, it was on season 1 anyway. It was a good mix, I think, of both people who had done the original show and then newbies and franchise, because you know nobody wanted to just remake the show. That wasn't the idea. But that being said, it was helpful to have, you know, people around who knew the world and knew how it worked and knew, you know, certain things obviously like need to be consistent. So I think it really was a good balance. And obviously everybody on the show is, you know, a very good student and does their research. And so, you know, so we spent a lot of time, you know, boning up on old episodes that, you know, we might have forgotten about that we needed to reference for XYZ reasons, that kind of thing. So yeah.
I saw in a different interview you did that, you know, you wanted to create your own look with the show, but you had mentioned but still keeping relatively consistent, but that you would introduce things like, in your example, Steadicam, which wasn't used in Game of Thrones. And it kind of made me think like, God, Game of Thrones it feels so recent, but it was, you know, like what, 2009, something like that when it started. How have obviously didn't shoot Game of Thrones, but how have the more modern tools now, you know, maybe a decade later, helped with this show or your career in general, like over a span of time?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, just to clarify, I think it wasn't that Steadicam wasn't available when they were shooting. It was
just didn't use it.
Yeah, exactly. That it was shot in this very considered classic way. So lots of, you know, dolly moves and crane and et cetera. But your question, sorry, what was your actual question?
Just tools? Yeah, because thank you for actually correcting, because this is the ADHD in me that maybe people find interesting or hopefully interesting. Yeah, because I was thinking like, oh, you know, back in 2008, 2009, up through 2012 maybe, there's this very interesting kind of change in filmmaking, I feel, where there was that very traditional filmmaking style that then was modified by whether it be visual effects techniques or new, you know, digital cameras, LED, for instance, stuff like that. And so when you mentioned like, oh, we added Steadicam, I was like, that is funny that like, that's such a tool that we would use. Of course you would, you know, or a gimbal or whatever. But back then it maybe not for every show, but it did feel a bit more no. That was a very specific tool. So the question being, over your career, how have the more modern tools I saw you were shooting on like the 65 for this show, but like LED lights, the massive sensor stuff like that. How have those maybe helped or even hurt your workflow, or if anything?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I definitely think new tools should be, and I embrace them, right? So it was interesting. Last year there was on the show we were using a lot more tungsten lighting, and that's something that Fabs is a big fan of. And so because he set up the show, like that's what the package consisted of predominantly. And and I came on and wanted, because he basically would never use an Astera tube to do any kind of like fiery thing. And
put it on the chart. We mentioned the Astera tubes.
And meanwhile, like, because he and I like co-taught this class recently at the NFTS. And so it was his class, and I was sort of just, there for, like the dynamic duo or whatever. But he purposely invited me to be like, there's no one way to do this stuff, kids. And so he's going on about how, we use real flame. And if we need to supplement the flame, it's just, a little bit of tungsten, and that's it. And I'm like, but I actually did, slip some tubes in there for this one scene and da-da-da. So yeah. So, and this season, I don't think I'm breaking my NDA by saying that we are using a lot more LED. So yeah.
I can't imagine that's under an NDA. Don't mention panels.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, yeah, I both think that there's something to be said for, especially for this show, we do try to, ground the camera choices in reality, so that even when we're doing, dragons flying through the air or whatever, it's like the camera ought to be dragon mounted, or it ought to be dragon, so it doesn't feel like just sort of floating in the air with no, no basis in what is what would the reality of this situation be. So so that does sort of lend itself to more crane work and more rather than, I don't know, zippy drone shots or something.
Right.
So it's the creative that informs what the tools are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The one thing with LED that I've noticed, and it, I try to be as, I suppose pragmatic's not the right word, but like realistic about things. Like tungsten does have a punchier, like something, tungsten and skin really love each other. And I have yet to find an LED, even the super powerful ones, that does that thing, and sometimes you can tell, like certain movies, certain shows, it's kind of like, I don't want to say they look cheap, but you can feel that lack of reality. It might be mounting a camera to a dragon, where an operator would be, but in some cases it is like even just the quality of light can make things not quite feel.
No, totally. And I think that's something that I learned, from Fabs, is just that, like, if you can do it with a real flame, you should, because then it's real.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes the actors are walking around and you can't put a flame where you want to, so it's a tube.
Yeah. ADHD again. Have you heard of the Hydra panels?
I don't think so. Who makes them?
Astera. So.
Oh. No, I haven't.
Waste some time here. They sent me these things, and I'm curious on they just sent me these things. And I don't quite know how I would use them. So now I'm going to just ask you. But they're same technology as the tubes, but they're these little bricks, and they have like focusing screens and grids and stuff like that. But there's a little magnet on the back and little mounting points. But the tubes, everyone mentioned, every single interview, someone mentions using the Astera tubes somewhere. And I'm wondering, would something like this off the top of your head fit the same utility? Because I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they're making them, to supplement, right? Not to replace.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes the tube form is annoying to me, and I'll put them together and I'll wrap a whole bunch of diffusion around them just so that if it's reflected in somebody's eye or whatever, it's not just that line, and so I am looking for ways to hide the tubeness. So
I can't remember who I was talking to.
And something that small, you can hide it, behind a computer or behind, anyway, I'm looking at a computer. That's why I'm thinking about it. But
Sure.
Behind anything blocky on a table, you could just sort of prop it up, and I can think of applications.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I bring it up is because I don't do enough work where I don't do any work where sets are being built for me. And I feel like the stereotubes or even the panels, the hydro panels there, or anything like that feel more like things that would be built into a set and less often supplements for like a key light or something like that. But do you feel that way? Actually, that's a great question. What was your relationship like with the production design team? Because obviously you don't get in ye olden times, you don't get light fixtures. Everything's motivated by a window or a flame. So how are you how are you working with the production design team trying to come up with motivation? Did you have any input?
Oh yeah, all the time. In fact, I think actually this season there's some sort of running joke about like which department has Katie not asked to cut a hole in something that's theirs to put a light through it. And right now I've done it, definitely production design is the first people in construction. Because I'm always like, can we put a hole there in that part of the set, but I asked costume if we could, cut a little hole to run a little wire for a little light behind a candle. I asked stunts if I could cut a hole in some of their stuff. I asked
he leaves the set and it's just Swiss cheese.
Yeah. The special effects department has cut holes in their stuff. So it's always a collaboration between all the departments. Where is the light coming from? But you're right. In Game of Thrones world, it does realistically, practically only come from windows and flame sources, and when you're exterior, obviously the sky. So for sets where there are no windows, then and even sets where there are, because not there are certain scenes where you want to be motivated. That's the first thing I ask myself is like, where would the light be coming from in this scene? And how can we, how can we improve on that or make it work for what the blocking is or what the, what's happening basically in the scene. So I work really closely with both the production designer and then the set decorator. Claire Richards is always a huge fan of mine because I'm always like, where are the torchieres and where are the, where are the candles and where's the this and where's the that? So, but she's amazing and she always comes through for me.
That's rad. Is it easier to, my brain's just in the Star Trek world because it's in so many of those things, but is it easier to, or harder to light a set, light a person when the motivation for said light is relatively apparent, window, fire, whatever, versus something like Doctor Who where, in the TARDIS or whatever, you got lights coming from everywhere. It can be a lot more, what's that phrase? If you have two lights, you have two problems. If you have one light, you have one problem. I imagine the more sci-fi stuff, you've got 107 problems.
Yes. Yeah. The TARDIS is a lighting problem unto itself. The season I did was the second. Chris Chibnall had taken over as showrunner the season before I got there, so they had sort of established already this, new Redux TARDIS or whatever on the previous season. But that show at that time, I actually hear that budget wise, it's improved. But at that time, it was like the paint was not yet dry and we were shooting on the set. And so that had happened to them in the season before where they had like just finished making it and the DP showed up and just like had zero time to balance out, what lights were what colors and how all that worked. And so the season that I started, I sort of heard about that nightmare and because the set was happily standing from before, I was able to get in there early, and start balancing that set both unto itself and then with the LUT that we had and the camera and the color balance and that kind of thing. So yeah, that was definitely a project that it was important that I take on because they spent a lot of money in post trying to fix people's, skin tones and stuff because it was a total, it's kind of a cluster in there basically.
Yes. Well, it's fascinating. Speaking of fandoms, I've been a pretty big Doctor Who fan my whole life. Me and my girlfriend met because of Doctor Who. And it's amazing. It is fun. But it is amazing how much everyone who's worked on that show. I got to interview the costume designer from the first couple seasons. She was like, we had $5. But it's amazing that all of the teams, including you, are able to do with what ends up, you find out, being a relatively limited budget.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's that there's some delightfully old school things. I'll give you an example. The TARDIS itself, it comes on location in 4 pieces because it's a box. And, like you can just picture it, right? And then when they open the door on the inside, it's just a, at least when I was showing you, it's not even a blue screen. It's like it's a picture. It's a picture. Yeah. So it's very. I had such a good time working on that show. It's so fun and everybody who does it, does it for the love. Really, it's just a riot. So yeah.
Well, you also get the distinguished position, I suppose, of being. I can't imagine there's too many Americans who shot that show, but also that's like working on Doctor Who has got to be like being on Law and Order in New York. Like if you do that, you're officially a New Yorker. Like you shot Doctor Who, so you're officially British.
Yeah, that's how it felt. Actually, that is exactly how it felt. Because I think I shot it in the year I got my British passport as well. So it's just like tick tick.
Yeah. Did you, I guess same question as before, did you come into that show having seen it, been a fan, or was that kind of a new job that you're like, oh, time to learn about this one too?
Yeah, before my interview, I had literally never, ever watched it. So obviously knew what it was and knew what the TARDIS was. And, I could answer a few basic
pieces together.
Yeah, but no, I had to do a deep dive basically and really bone up. But it's really difficult because there's decades to watch. So you have to ask the internet, what is the best Doctor Who episode? And then they give you this big list, and you're like, okay,
yeah,
there are some great ones out there, and it is a great show, and it's a great, it's a great dynasty to be a part of, or whatever.
Yeah. You said you shot the second Jodie Whittaker season?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
That's right.
Yeah. It looked great, by the way. Like every year they make it look better, but yeah, that season, first season, second season looked just like a movie, just like anything else, So good work there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. No, it was really fun. I have to say, so because they were shooting anamorphic, that was a fun,
right?
Particularly for my director, who I was working with, Jamie Stone, whose whole thing is 14 millimeter lens this close to an actor's face, and then you just pull out, And I had to be like, we can't really do that on this format. So we had to carry some wide spherical primes to do certain shots, and that was fun. But yeah, no, they were very. We tried for a hot second to see if they would consider switching the format, and it was no, because they had just switched the season before and had loved it. So
Yeah, I mean, it's a great look. Did they go so far as to try to replicate the anamorphic look in post on when you were shooting spherical, or did they just kind of let it play?
No, I think they just let it play. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Although I will say the colorist did have the colorist is Gareth Spenceley. He's been doing that show for years, and he's wonderful. And he does have a very large catalog of, certain flares and stuff like that. So some of that stuff, gets added at that stage. But yeah, I can't remember any specific examples from my episodes.
Sure. But again, quote unquote, relatively low budget show, that's not something that necessarily needs to be done for what is ostensibly a weekly serial,
Yeah.
No one's nitpicking that hard. Hopefully. Well, some people. But that does bring up an interesting question is in what ways, I've been able to ask this about people like East Coast, West Coast, but in what ways is the UK style of shooting different from the US, and better or worse for your own personal workflow, I suppose?
Yeah, so there's a few key differences. Chiefly, the grip department is very different here. So they only deal with camera, as cranes and dollies and all of that is what they do, and they have nothing to do with lighting. So if you hand the grip a C-stand over here, look at you,
stab you with it.
Yeah. I'll be like, what am I supposed to do this? So that was a big, difference. So everything goes through the gaffer. When it comes to lighting and how you want to cut and shape light, it's all the electrical department. What else is different? I mean, just in terms of, working hours, a standard working day here is 10 hours on camera and an hour for lunch, which is really
damn
really intense. So they have a semi-continuous working day, which is 9.5 hours on camera and a half an hour for lunch, and that feels a little bit more normal. Because when you stop for an hour in the middle of the day, you're like, and now what am I supposed to? Everybody, yeah, and everybody's just like, the actors get out of costume, and and everybody comes back like all bleary eyed, and it just takes that much longer to like get up and running again. So yeah, we try to not do standard working days if we can help it. Semi-continuous is much better. You get to go home effectively an hour earlier. And then we also sometimes do a continuous day, which is 9 hours, no breaks. And that's excellent. Everybody goes home at 5 and has a life.
Do they do the old just crafty walking around with snacks on a platter and just going, here, you eat that?
I mean, they still give us lunch, but it's literally just like everybody, standing around. They have to break the actors, of course.
Right.
But yeah, the rest of us are just like shoveling food in our faces as we're trying to run around and focus lights or whatever. So.
The Anthony Bourdain standing over a trash can and wolfing whatever down method.
Yeah, exactly. So, but everybody does prefer it. Like nobody wants to break. Everybody just wants to plow through. Get keep the momentum up, get it done, and then go home and have a tiny bit of a life before coming back to do it again. So I do find the hours are more humane in that way, and there's really no such thing as a fratter day over here. We're about to do one of them next week, and everybody is like, "What is this? This is not on." That's what they say over here. Not on.
Add that to the lexicon.
So yeah, and
I imagine that helps with, if we're gonna get maybe, I don't know if in the weeds is the right word, but a little meta. But I imagine those kind of constant working hours really helps with the flow state. Like you're saying, you break for an hour, it's going to take 2 hours to get the next shot off.
Yeah.
But if you're working 9 straight, it might be potentially more tiring, but the quality of work may actually end up being higher because, again, you're constantly in that sort of flow state.
Yeah. I mean, you say you have ADHD. I feel like the majority of people who work in film, have it. So if you can just like stay on a task and do it, and then you're done, I just feel like it I don't know. It definitely suits my brain better as well.
Yeah. For me, it's definitely like, I've not been diagnosed with ADHD. TikTok would have me believe that everyone on TikTok wants to tell you how you've got ADHD, and they'll tell you all the reasons why. But assuming one of them is right, I do find that the novelty of film work definitely suits my mental profile. When given a new task, that collaborative problem solving is definitely what keeps the serotonin going or whatever, whereas repetitive tasks, by the third one, I'm just like, and I am out, like start turning into Andy Dwyer, just,
Absolutely. Well, this is why, so I was diagnosed with ADD actually in college. And this is why I switched majors. And this is why I couldn't be a camera assistant, because that is actually quite repetitive. I mean, I was, but I just wasn't a very good one. And I think it's definitely why, being on set is a great place for my brain, because it's just like constant input,
yeah,
and stimulus and the whole sort of like immediate gratification is all there, especially in what we do, right? Because we are literally, and there's a time, that the factor of time is just so critical, right? That like, it's like, and when will you be lit? Like, in 20 minutes, great. And so you just have to like focus and do it in that time. And that's when I really just feel like I'm on, and let's do it. And if I'm left to my own devices by myself to do anything without a time deadline, it's just, what I'm saying, it's not going to happen.
So I write for Pro Video Coalition, which is like a film news / gear review website, and they're very chill because they don't like, I'm not an employee there. We're all freelance, and so companies will send me gear to review, and sometimes it'll be months before that article goes up because I'm just fully uninspired. Not that the tech is bad or anything. Like, I got the Blackmagic 12K. They were like, hey, review this. I was like, great. And I just could not be arsed, as they say, to pick it up and go film something, because I just had nothing inspired. I'm sure a neurotypical individual would be like, oh, I have to go do this now and go. But those imposed deadlines, as you say, are definitely very helpful for someone like me.
Oh, yeah. No, I get everything done based on a deadline model.
Yeah,
for sure.
You said you switched majors. What was your major original?
So I was a humanities major, joint humanities major. It was history, philosophy, literature, and a romance language. So it involved a lot of reading, and I realized I couldn't keep up,
Yeah.
It was too much. A lot of reading and a lot of writing.
Good background for film, though.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I was trying, I'll tell you what, I was trying to do both. I was trying to do that and a film studies major, and that just became an impossible amount of, to be perfectly honest, like the classes clashed, and it was just, it was just logistically, like I would have had to add another year onto my tenure at college, which I just thought, nah, I'll just do film studies. And that was excellent.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that you didn't have a television, and I was thinking about it, and I did have television, but I didn't really watch it. I was much more like, I grew up in a very small town, 5,000 people total. So we had one theater, it had one screen. And then if you drove a half hour, there was a place that had like 8 screens. And so me and my friends would pile in the car and go do that. But I do feel like that experience, like that escapism from that tiny ass town, definitely is one of the major things that pushed me into film, because that was the thing that got me out of there. Was it the same for you? Because like not having a TV, but being allowed to go see movies or at least rent them, but like feels like it must have been kind of a similar experience for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely escapist, but also, my family genuinely all loves movies. Like to this day, we have weekly Zoom calls, and all we do is talk about movies and TV. We now do talk about TV.
Sure.
Now everybody watches TV. But so I think it was just like something we also did together as a family, and it was like an activity, and and we had a great local video store that I wound up working at in high school. And, and we just would go together and like, pick out what we were watching that night. So, I mean, I think, I don't know, it was a treat, basically. It was a treat
Right.
that we got to do when we were, I don't know. Good.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't have been prescriptive and been like, that must have been the same for you. But I need to get better just asking a question instead of telling you what I think. No, now that whole thought process is gone. I do miss, you were mentioning like being on set and then Game of Thrones come out and then on Monday, like everyone was talking about it. I do kind of miss that. We're starting to seemingly go back to that, but that weekly release schedule did create more community and more discussion and more, love around your favorite shows and stuff like that. And I feel like going to the rental store and like staring at the wall and just picking based off of box art, or maybe trusting the weirdo working behind the register in my case. But that sort of non-film.
Did you work at a video store?
No, my friend did, and he was a weirdo.
Okay. Well, we have a pick section, and if somebody came to the counter with your staff pick, you'd be like, "Oh, that's mine. Like I'm Katie. You're watching my pick." And you'll be like, it's the whole thing. And so, and people would call the store all the time to be like, "What's new? That's good. That's in." And you'd have to like go to the back and be like, "Oh, well, this has just come in," and people seem to like. Anyway, it's just you just talked to strangers about movies, which I don't do I don't do it anymore. I mean, I talk to, reporters, but
well, it's something that I think, certainly made me love film is those non-strictly film. I was never even during college, I did not have a well-curated critical mind. That happened much later. I just enjoyed film and I enjoyed talking to my friends about it. And it does feel like unless you're on like internet forums, which are the worst place to discuss films and television, you don't get that experience anymore. And in your case, curating films must have been so gratifying. It's, it's like you get to share things you love with other people. That's the best.
No, it was really fun. And when I got to college, because I didn't know what I wanted to study. Obviously, you can tell if I was enjoying humanities, it's like 4 things. But I started working in they ran a cinema screening. Anyway, there were 2 cinemas at the college and they ran a film, what's it called? Anyway, a film series throughout the year. So they would program all these films and they would order in the prints. And so we were projecting on film on both 16 and 35. And so I immediately, signed up to be, and it was it was a paid job as well. So I was a student film projectionist in the series, and it was through doing that then people were like, "Oh, well, are you interested in studying film? Or are you going to be a film studies major?" And it had just never occurred to me before that it was actually something you could study. I literally just thought it was, like I said before, it was a treat. It was something, we got to do when we had done all our schoolwork or whatever.
Yeah, that does seem to be a common refrain amongst DPs that I've interviewed is like, it feels kind of corny. But everyone going like, "Oh, I didn't know people made movies. I thought they just existed." They would just show up, and then they were there. There's people there.
And the thing is, like, you see the credits, but especially if you grew up watching older films, which we did as well. My sister and I were just huge, like, old movie musicals, and they would list like 2 names, right?
Yeah. And up front too, so you forget about them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so I guess I was aware that, there was somebody behind the camera and somebody to do the costumes, but it literally just, none of that clicked into place until I got to college.
Yeah. I did want to ask a boring technical question that I'm sure we can get through. And that is, I did see that you were shooting Alexa 65 and LF. And I was wondering what the sort of unique challenges with working with such a large sensor are, and what benefits does it bring you? Because there's a lot of misinformation about larger sensors giving you a certain look. Most people don't actually know what that means. They're thinking lenses, they're not thinking sensors. So I was wondering your hands-on experience, what does working on those larger format cameras give you? And what do you have to think about more than Super 35?
Yeah, I mean, what do you have to think about more? You sort of have to, similar to shooting anamorphic, say, you have to sort of consider the focus plotter.
Yeah. 1.8 mud figured out. It's on a 105.
And depth of field. So yeah, there's a lot of consideration to that. Interestingly, because we had those 2 cameras to choose from, if we were doing a shot that was quite VFX heavy, they would often want us to do that on the LF, just because of how that sensor got cropped and how we had more room top and bottom for them to, stabilize or wiggle stuff around or whatever. So that was interesting, because it was always sort of my default to be like, oh, if we're doing this big shot, we'll do it on the big camera. And that wasn't always, the best for all departments. So if we were doing something VFX heavy, then we'd have that discussion and weigh those pros and cons. It was interesting to shoot a show with 2 cameras because you are always sort of having to do the math in your head about like, okay, on the 65, I want it to be on this lens. But then if something happens last minute and suddenly I need to send this A camera off to do this other shot and the B camera has got to do the shot, then that means it should be on this lens. And so, so we had like the assistants made us, I wore it around my neck, but the little lens chart that sort of had the, what all the focal lengths were, and then the equivalence. Yeah. Because that was definitely just something you had to get used to, really. So, yeah.
Were you using... Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
You go. Okay. Were you using... Because obviously with the 65, your lens choices are, really reduced, because there's not a lot of lenses that have a imaging circle big enough. Were you using the same lenses across both cameras, or did you have 2 different sets and just lean into their strengths?
Yeah, we had 2 different sets. So they were both DNA lensing, they're lovely. But yeah, one was made specifically for the Alexa 65, one set, and the other set specifically, well, they were LF, mini LFs, DNA LFs, yeah. Yeah.
When we went to Cinegear a few months ago, I got to peruse all the ARRI lenses, and those DNAs are just like, they're too good. They're too good.
No, they're lovely. And I have to say, so what I was going to say before, and then I stopped myself because I also just never sure what I'm allowed to say, but we have changed the format this year. I won't tell you to what. I'll leave that a surprise for...
It's Alexa 35 or Venice. I bet it's Venice. Link if it's Venice.
But basically, so we changed the format, and so we changed the lens, and part of that was because we put the DNAs on this new format, and we lost a lot of what was interesting on the large format from last year. So we went a different direction. That's all I'll say.
Well, I'm going to cut this part out, but now it's definitely the Alexa 35. Do you have the CineLens manual?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Greatest publication in a decade.
I know. And I met those guys when I went to the ASC Awards, and I was like, I have your book, and they were like, cool, we have your show. It was just like, it was really nice.
Yeah, Holden is. I interviewed Holden, and I suppose I can consider him a friend now. We've hung out enough, but he's definitely. I've watched him interact with people at a few events where they're like gushing over, they're being hyper nerdy, and I just watch him go like, yes, great, like, the dude's probably tired at this point.
But the thing with that book is just like your BSC book, they have to add the new, that book, they'll never be finished, right? They'll just have to keep reissuing it because people are making lenses these days like nobody's business.
Luckily the first half of that book is pretty evergreen, but yeah, the second half of all the stuff about every lens that's ever made. And I got some lenses that I was supposed to review, and I opened the book, I'm basically just going to copy it for my review, and they're not in there. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. These guys spent literally half a decade on this thing, and they're going to, like you said, they're going to have to put inserts in or something. It is wild. Do you pay much attention to how many new lenses are coming out? It seems like, not to be derogatory, but it seems like China's just kicking out lenses every 5 minutes. There's a new one coming out of there. The optics companies over there are going nuts.
Yeah. No, I feel like every time I blink, somebody's like, oh, have you tried this? And I'm like, oh, never even heard of that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But it's an exciting time. Yeah.
It's more exciting on cameras. Cameras they've leveled off.
Yeah. No, it's very much more exciting than cameras. I agree.
Do you, we're coming up on time. Look at my notes. Good heavens. Did we talk about all this? Oh, I did want to ask, have you had to sort of change the way you think about maybe exposure or just general shooting philosophy when shooting for television versus something that is theoretically going straight to streaming?
It's a good question. There has been a lot of recent discussion about exposure, but sort of more generally than that, just how dark is too dark. Is that the nature of your question, sort of? Or
not specifically. The only reason I mentioned that is because obviously you never know how fast someone's internet is. You never know if their TV is calibrated or anything. So if they're getting a lower bit rate image, any amount of dark is too dark, and as cinematographers, we love to have one little slash of light. But yes. I know especially with Game of Thrones, there's a little dark. That's not specifically what I'm talking about, but just what are the considerations when thinking about a streaming show versus something that's going to terrestrial television? If there are any.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, sorry, I think I actually misheard the question because in my head, I was just thinking is there a difference between TV versus film that's meant for theatrical? And that's that's where I separate. In my mind, there's no separation anymore between streaming and TV because it all just seems like, it's one thing and people can watch the same show, both all the ways. Right. Yeah. But really the tricky thing, I think, for people who are wanting to shoot television shows like movies is just that we have zero control over how people watch them, and therefore everything can be too dark to somebody who's looking at phone and later. You know what I'm saying? So that is really difficult.
Well, and the other issue is I was coloring this one music video, and where's my voice going? Oh, sorry. I was coloring this music video, and the notes kept coming back oh, it's too saturated, it's too red, it's too saturated. And I basically dropped the red channel out, and they're like, no, still the skin looks weird. I was like, what the hell? And then I was talking to Larkin Seipel, who shot Beef and Everything Everywhere, and he was like, oh, are they watching it on a MacBook? I was like, yeah. And he goes, yeah, you can't do that. You got to have them find an iPad or something because the red channel on that's all goofed up. And I was like, really? So I have them do that. Sure enough, they're like, oh, actually, yeah, can we go back to version 2? We're on version 8 at this point. Fuck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I do any remote grading, it's like iPad. Make sure you watch on your iPad, and then it seems to work. So really, everybody should just get iPads.
Yeah, I guess that new iPad Pro. I'm not an Apple fan by any means, but the new chips are amazing, and I guess that iPad Pro just has an amazing, like, very accurate screen.
Yeah. No, I have found that mine's quite good.
Yeah. Well, like you said, you've got a heart out, and apparently so does my voice. So we can wrap it up there. But I would love to have you back and keep chatting with you, because I feel like I could probably come up with at least a few more questions. So when you're, how about when you're done working on this show, you can come back, and then we don't have to talk about that show. We can talk about whatever. Pencils.
Sounds good. Pencils it is. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and sorry I have to go, but early call times, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I watched the sun go down behind you, so I was like,
I know. You can just see the whole room get dark, and I was sort of playing around with the light levels in this place before, and the overhead lighting, it's atrocious, so that's why it's just...
I gotta say, one of the funnest things, and I've never actually mentioned this, but something I look forward to is every DP's approach to how invested they are in their Zoom lighting. Obviously, I send it a little bit with this, but like, sometimes it's like straight. I've had people just wander around their house with their iPhone, and then some people have had like full on, like, yeah, I plugged my LF into this, and I've got full sky panels. I'm like, bro, it's Zoom. It's fun.
No, but you've done your Zoom very well. I'm impressed. But yeah, this is hotel room living. So yeah, I'm just all huddled by the window.
Yeah. Well, like I said, thank you so much, and have fun working tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Thanks for the chat, and talk.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. As this is an independently funded podcast, we rely on support from listeners like you. So if you'd like to help, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/frameandrefpod. We really appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for listening.